Pei Hey Amid Aleph, the second line. So we learned yesterday about when you have different seeds in a garden. So normally, a pi'alacha, you have to have them 1.5. Each one nourishes 1.5 tefachim. So between two of them, you have to have 3 tefachim away. But we have a kula of heker. If you notice if it's noticeable that they're not next to each other, we say it's okay. And that's why our Mishnah said that you could have 5 seeds in 6 tefach in a patch of your garden of 6 by 6. Now the Gemara says, "Minalan minada kimle rabbanan the chamisha b'shita." How did the rabbanan know this whole concept? I don't know. Were they farmers? Did they know exactly how 5 seeds does in 6 tefachim? How do they know that? Like Rashi explains, Manola da kimle rabbanim b'shir yinika milsi lemismechala, to rely v'loima b'kinei chachamim b'avodas adama. They know farmland. Leida kama yunkim, how much they nourish. Letetam aloim mi heiti lebrius. Who told these yeshiva boys, the talmidei chachamim, about the land? So Gemara says it is a milsi. The Amar Abchia Barabba Amar Yechon might exist. It says in pasuk leisasik gevul rayecha asher gavul rishonim. So the pasuk says that if you have a field, you cannot move the fences of your field into your friend's field. But at the same time, you cannot plow, you cannot seed your seeds very close to your friend's, to the adjacent field, because it's going to take the nourishment away from your friend's field. That's what the pasuk says. Gvul shegavla rishonim loitasik. The way they planted in the early days, you shouldn't do that. Because my Gavla Rishonim, what did the first people do before Klal Yisrael came to Eretz Yisrael? How did they know what to do? Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, might exhibit. It says in pasuk, Eilu b'nei Seir hachori yoshvei aretz. These are the nation of Seir, that they dwell on the land. So why only b'nei Seir? Atu kuli almi yoshvei kinenu. Are they the only ones on the earth? What, everybody else is living in the sky, up in heaven? Ella, what it means, they were Yeshu Aretz. What does it mean? They understood plowing, what that land is about. They knew they knew that this piece of land, this is good to grow olives. They knew they knew that this dirt is good for a vineyard. They knew that the other one is good for figs. So that's Yoshvei Aretz. They understood what to plant. When it says Chayre, what does that mean? Shemarichin es Aretz. They used to smell the land, in other words, to know what earth is good for what. And then it says Seir HaChayre, also V'chivi. Why were they called Chivi? Amar of Papish Hayitamim is Aretz. They used to taste the land for what to plant. Kichavya. Like a snake. A snake's food, Rashi says, is dirt, the dirt of the land. So they understood that. Rav Acha bar Yaakov omer choyrei shenase b'nei choyrei b'nei. In other words, when they were chased out of their land, they didn't have to. They were free from work. Really, they didn't want to. They were unemployed. They didn't have a land to work. But what do we see from here? We see that these people knew that they were how much unika, what nourishment the ground gives out. So Chachamim base their shiurim of 1.5 tefach according to these people. They must have spoken to them and then kicked them out. Okay, so that's how we know the shear of 5 seeds in a patch of 6 by 6. Amar Avasi. Very simple, right? Now we're getting into it. Amar Avasi, Aruga Tocha Vav. In other words, when the Mishnah says that you're allowed to plant 5 seeds in a patch of 6 by 6.
Isn't it 5 species in a patch of 6 by 6?
Yeah, 5 different seeds. Because if they're all the same, then who cares how close they are? There's no kalayim. But that means there are different types of seeds. So therefore you cannot plant them next to each other. So either with 3 tefachim apart or with a heker. So here when the Mishnah says that the patch is 6 by 6, it's chutz migvaleh. It's excluding the boundary. What does the boundary mean? Rashi says, the 4th wide line, Aruga Shamra Tzvichli as Vav, when it has to be 6 by 6, Chutz Mikovaleh. Shayimanichim Baruga Karke Cholek, they left around the patch a piece of land, Spivas has real Lamakim Disha. So around the 6, in other words, it has to be 6 by 6, and then you have another area outside that where the farmer could walk. When he's watering his seeds. He walks on the border. Don't say when it says 6 by 6 you include where the farmer could walk on the border. No. So in other words, if it's included in the 6 by 6, so normally the farmer has to, each patch needs a tefach. So if you have a tefach inside the 6 by 6, it's going to be so close, Rashi says. There will only be el arba, there will only be 4 tefachim between the plantings. So it must be that the 6 by 6 is without the gvulin. So you need a patch of 6 by 6, and then on the outside you have to leave a small piece of land where you could walk to water the field. So that's what Rav Asi says. Aruga tocho vav chutz mikavaleha. But the outside there has to be an empty piece of land. Tani namihachi. That's not plowed. Tani namihachi. Aruga is teicha shisha. The inside has to be 6. So for the Gemara, now that you're leaving the gvulin, the boundary outside, empty, so bekama, how wide is that? So that the farmer can come around and water it. So where it says, get a tanan, Rabbi Yehuda, how wide is this border that you're leaving outside the patch of 6 by 6? Is kimale roichev parsa. It's the width of your footprint, which is a tefach. So in other words, you have to leave a tefach outside each. If you have a 6 by 6, you have to leave a patch outside of a tefach around it. So Amar Rab Zeir v'Tamer Rab Chanina Bar Papa, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say the width of a footprint? The Ksiv, it says the Shkisa b'Raglecha Kigan Hayerek. It's praising. In other words, it's talking about Mitzrayim. The only way they could get water to their fields, Rashi says, is lahatin al kasafach mayim. They had to draw water in pails and carry it al halal b'Raglecha Sivosel la'ashkoso. Right? So in other words, Klal Yisrael, and in other words, Eretz Yisrael is not like way. Mitzrayim, they didn't have the climate, they didn't have the rains, so the only way they could get water is drawing it out of the Nile and bringing it to the fields. But in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael was praised that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave rain that you didn't have to draw water, right? But what is the raya from here? Rashi says, why does it have to say v'shkisa b'raglecha? They're watering with their feet. Must be it's teaching you when you're watering a patch of land that's 6 by 6, you have to have a footprint, which is a tefach. Okay.
So you have a gavul plus an irrigation ditch? I mean, there's not an irrigation.
Well, we're not talking about the irrigation. Now they're bringing it from somewhere else.
Huh? But
right?
There's not a lot of irrigation that goes into these vegetables.
Okay, but that's...
want to plant different vegetables in the same...
No, I understand.
We're talking on halacha. In halacha, you have to leave one outside the 6 by 6.
The tefach all around, basically.
Around, right. So now, Amar Rav comes along and says, Haruga berchur b'shenina. When we allow in a patch of 6 by 6, 5 different types of seeds, it's only when it's there by itself. That means around this patch, there's nothing else growing next to it, adjacent. It's churba. It's empty. Right? Okay, Rashi explains that, or do we have to go into Rashi? Rashi basically says that there's no other patch around it. Let's read Rashi. In other words, when we allow 5 different types of seeds in a patch of land, there shouldn't be any other patches around it. Our Mishnah says in this patch we allow 5 different types of seeds in a 6 by 6. Right? But in Tizra, if there's going to be another patch right next to this one, the ones that are on the side, if you have another patch, they're going to be so close to each other. So therefore, we don't allow 5 different seeds in a patch of 6 by 6. It has to be churba. There can't be anything else around it. Okay. So the Gemara says, why not? But ikamakim kronias. In other words, why do you have to say that there's no other patches? Why don't we say that the way you place the seeds were not right across the ends of... Like we understood in our Mishnah, if you look at the picture in the Mishnah, that they planted it right across. right? And left that little tefach, that little dot on the corners empty. But it was right across. Who said that's the way they planted it? Maybe they planted it like here in Rashi, that in each corner they left space. You see Rashi, each one. So in other words, when you have the middle one, if you look at the middle patch of 6 by 6, so on each side, the north, the east, the west, and the south side, you have it at the corners. That's how you. So now when you have an adjacent one from the outside, those other 8 around it, they're not next to each other because they're not exactly opposite each other. They're separated. So why do you have to say that the middle patch has to be there by itself? We could even surround it with other patches of 6 by 6 and get the same shear. So what's the problem? That's what we're saying. But in other words, planted on the corners, like the picture. The Gemara says, Amri Beid Rav Av, Ishmei the Rab Memales Kranios. The problem is that you are actually filling up the corners. Like the picture in Rashi means on one side you're going the whole length of the patch. On the other 2 sides you just plant a little bit in the middle, right? So if you have it completely full, you cannot have another patch next to each other because they're not going to be far enough away from each other, and they're going to nourish each other, and there's a problem of kalayim. Rashi says the malas karanias, 7 lines from the bottom. Rav Maikiv Masnisin. The whole side of the patch al aruga is full. You see it litzafon min mizrach lemara, from the north all the way from east to west on one side. V'chein ruach deromi avol mizrachi v'amaravi, on the east and the west side. Zereya mat, you only have that little dot, the little stuff on top. V'yaniach hefresh mikan v'kan. So therefore hilkach i'ata yachol is roya oid baruga she'etzloi. You cannot have a patch next to it. On the north and the south side, because the whole patch, according to Rav, was seated the whole side. So therefore you cannot have another patch next to each other. But Freddy Gemara, why can't you do it? In other words, the question is, okay, you cannot surround this middle patch with ones all around it, but at least have a few, like if you look at there's a Bach, in the Bach's picture, an Aleph, you have if you see the Bach, if everybody has the Bach, you have the middle patch, right, which our Mishnah says, instead of putting all like 8 of them around it, only put 4 in the corners. If you put 4 in the corners, you see, even though the middle one, you see that the whole side, it's away from the other side, from the other patch. So why can't you do it? So why does Rav say it's churba that is complete, not even another patch around it? We could say that on the outside part, at least you're planting. So more answer. The reason why you can't do that is you might come to fill up the corners of those patches. In other words, and therefore, you might come and extend the corners. Because according to the Bach, how he shows it, it's only in the middle you planted the corner ones. But maybe this guy will make a mistake and do the whole side, and therefore they'll be too close to each other, and there's going to be a problem of kalayim. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, L'yeh el roish tur yerek. Now we have an Indian of roish tur. Roish tur is, if you see the diagram, like a triangle. If you have a field, right? If somebody has a field that's planted with certain seeds, you're allowed to come and plant. There's a kula that if you plant like on a triangle and you have another type of seeding that comes into the field on an angle like that. In other words, so since it's noticeable that it's different, the way that you plant it is different, we allow that. It's not any of climb anymore. That's the hecker, right? So that kula only applies really to a field. And then you're just planting an aruga, a little patch into that field, so it's very noticeable. So the Gemara is saying here too, why can't we say with each patch, why don't we have the heter where it's very noticeable that it's like a roish tar? That's what the Gemara is asking now. L'hei roish tar yerek. Didn't we learn a Mishnah, roish tar yerek? If it's going like in a triangle, nichlas l'tech sada, that goes in, acher, mutter, v'nei shenira soif sada. because it's noticeable that where the end of the field is and where the other seeds are coming in. So here too with our patch, let's look at Rashi. Even though you filled up the sides with all the seeds, and then you planted something that was very close to the other patch, even though there's not that much of a difference, in other words, those 3 tefachim are not there, who cares that they're close to each other? We should get the kula of Kalreis Torah. It's very noticeable. It's not from this field, it's from the other field, because it's coming in on an angle. Therefore, it's a hakera. And we really don't care about, even though they're nourishing from each other, but since you have this heker, that takes away of yanika. So why can't we allow that? So the Gemara answers, Ein Rosh Tor Baruka. This heter, where we allow that one patch of land goes into a field, that's only when it goes into a complete field. But it doesn't apply from one patch into another small patch of land. It only applies where you have a small patch of land that's going into a big field, but not one little patch into another patch. And therefore we don't allow, Rav says, you have to have this patch all by itself. You cannot have other patches on the corner, because maybe you're going to fill it up on all of them on all sides and it'll be too close to each other. Even though it is noticeable, we don't allow this Rosh Tor. Right? Look at Rashi. Ein Torah's heter Rosh Torah ma'aruga l'aruga. This leniency of Rosh Torah, where the angle goes in, but from one patch to another one, elam is sada gedola l'tech aruga. We only allowed from a large field into a little patch, or ma'aruga from a patch of 6 by 6 l'tech sada gedola. Or even sada gedola l'tech sada gedola. One big field into another one. Avol shtei arugos, 2 small patches of land, have a heker. That's not a heker. It looks like it's one. The aruga not considered by itself, and therefore the problem of unika kicks in, and therefore we wouldn't allow it. So that's why Rav says that this patch has to be b'churba. It has to be by itself. Shmuel comes along and says, no. You, Rav, said that the patch has to be by itself. The 6 by 6, which we allow 5 different types of seeds? No. Shmuel says, aruga ben arugo shenino. It could be with other patches around it. But they're really getting mixed in. In other words, Rashi says, the alin shel aruga, the leaves of one patch are going into the other patch. We said around each patch, we're supposed to have a tefach for the farmer to walk. So this patch has a tefach, the other one has a tefach, right? So they're only, each patch is 2 tefachim away from each other. If they're only 2 tefachim away from each other, that's not enough al klayim, because you need 3 tefachim, right? So the Gemara says, how does Shmuel allow patches all around to be, everybody has the seeds of 5 different zerayin, but misarvi madadi. And for the Gemara, minota shur lakan, v'shur lakan. You have to, in other words, they cannot be zu connected zu, like we said. In other words, they can't be all next to each other. One can be down here, one has to be up here. So they're away from each other. They're not opposite each other. Okay. Ama'ula. Bayi b'marava. They asked this question. Hifkia telam echat apnei kula. If you took one telem apnei kula, Rashi, 5th line, telem manishal shura, you have 1 row of plowing, apnei kula. Shehaver mizera shebet safon, lezera shebet daram, derech hamtzai. Vizara me'echad aminim. Let's say you combine one side to the other side. So when you had on all at the ends of the patch of 6 by 6, so they're separated by 6 tefachim. But all of a sudden, this person decided to bring another plow. In other words, instead of in our Mishnah, where you only have 1 little dot in the middle, he brought it across. So now he attached the north and the south with his telem. Does it ruin the whole thing? That's the shaila. He brought it across. Does it ruin it? So Amar Rav Sheshes, Bar Irvov, since you came with a long strip of seeding across from north to south, well, Bittul Zashura, it ruined it, the whole thing, and therefore it comes Aser. Rav Asi says no. Ein aruva mivatel zashura. That does not mivatel and it's okay. So Eisvei Rabbeinu Rav Ashi Hanoi te yashtei shuros. If somebody has, now this mission is not talking about a patch of land of 6 by 6. It's talking about a big field. A guy has a big field, and in the field he plants 2 rows of pumpkins, right? Or kishum or cucumbers. Shtei shuros, and then right next to these 2 rows, he plants 2 rows of gourds, pumpkins. Shtei shuros shel pula mitzri. So even though they're next to each other, we say they're mutter. Now Rashi explains, when you plant a kshuim, be'etzlon shtei shur shel ploim, be'etzlon be'shur shel pula mitzri, v'loi baruga, it's not talking about a patch, ela b'sada gedola, it's mutter. Why? The shtei shuros chashilum have b'sada l'nafsheyu. When you plant 2 rows of each of kshuim, that becomes, even though it's in one field, they themselves become one field. Because it's chashuv. So therefore it's noticeable if you have 2 rows of cucumbers, 2 rows of pumpkins next to each other, it's noticeable that they're like 2 different fields, and therefore it's okay. But, back to the Gemara, if you only plant shura acha shel kshuim, and then right next to it only 1 row of shura acha shel tluin and the shura acha shel pua mitzri, that is aser. Rashi says, why shura acha is mikol echad? That's irvuv. They become mixed up to each other. They're all yonik from each other. They're not considered one field. So what do we see from here? Alma, telam echad, have a irvuv. When you have 1 row, that 1 row of seating, it is mivatalid. So how could Rav Ashi say that if you have 1 that extends from the north to the south, it's not mivatal? Here we see it as mivatal. So Gemara answers, no. Shani hachad ikka sharava. With these cucumbers in this big field, and it's a big row, there you have all the branches, Rashi says. You have zemariseyem aruchos, long branches, umis arvis harba milmala. In other words, on top of the ground it looks all mixed up. That's why we don't allow it. But in our Mishnah, where it's a little patch, it's 6 by 6, and you put 1 seed in, right? You put different seeds, so even though you connected it, in other words, it's okay, because it's not mevatel it. And there's a heker, right? Because you didn't fill up the whole 6 by 6. Okay, now Amar of Kahana Rabbi Yochanan. Now Rabbi Yochanan comes along and says, Harotzel lemalos kol ginasai yerek. If somebody wants to, he has a garden basically, the 6 by 6, according to Rabbi Yochanan now, and he wants to fill it up with all types of vegetables, different types. So Isa aruga shisha al shisha. Now you want to fill it up. So you know what you do? You have a patch, a land of 6 by 6. The agol by chamisha. And then inside the 6 by 6, you put a circle, right? And you could put 5 in there. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you see the picture in Tosfos, right? So you have the circle inside the square. You could fill up the whole circle and on the corners. So therefore you could get a lot of vegetables planted in that 6 by 6. So Rashi, look at Rashi. In other words, how do you get your garden full? Rashi says, you make the patch a square, a 6 by 6. Then v'oigel b'chol aruga hay. In other words, inside you make a circle. V'zarei b'oigel minecha. Therefore, you could put 1 min. You could fill up the circle. V'yesh hekahar b'ledavar. V'ain tzarich laharchev bin aruga l'chaverta. Therefore, you can have another patch next to it. On the corners, you could put another type of seed. So you have 4 in the corners, 1 in the middle, right? So now, now it's so noticeable that each seed, even though they're different, has its own place in this patch, and therefore it's okay according to Rabbi Yochanan. So in other words, you could, instead of like our Mishnah, where you can only plant on the outside and a little one in the middle, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you could fill up most of the 6 by 6. That's the trick, he's saying. Mimala as karnosea. Try the Gemara now, but va'ika beini ubeini. But you have a problem here, Rashi says. We just explained that on the outside of this patch of 6 by 6, you need a border that you're leaving open a tefach, right? So this border that we said before of aruga avav chutz megvulin v'oisek gvulin, when you have that border kishi yizarein, when you're going to plant it on the other side, mechabram es hekev ribu harugos v'havi irvuv shaheim shel shnei minim. If you have all the corners planted, now that you're going to have another patch right next to it, 6 by 6, and doing the same thing, they're going to be touching each other. And there's only 2 tefachim apart from each patch. A tefach for one border, tefach for the other one. So then there's a problem of klayim. So how does Rabbi Yochanan allow this? So Amar Rabbi Yanai b'marchiv bein ha-benayim. In other words, you don't fill it up completely. Rashi says bein nizarin l'malos the kamal Rabbi Yochanan. When Rabbi Yochanan says that you fill up this patch, this whole circle, lav dafka l'malos kol agina kamer. It's not the whole patch of 6 by 6. El shehiyeh kol agrosel maleos ula'olam chutz migvalayim. You cannot plant by the corners. You have to move it away from the boundary.
The circle has to be small.
Right, you have to move it away to give enough that you should make it like 3 tefachim away from the other patch. Rav Ashi Amar. Now, another thing. Im hoyo zeruin shesi zarin arif. If you have 2 patches next to each other, right? So if you have them all being planted at a certain, let's say, one way, so in the middle where we're allowing you're allowed to go ahead and plant other ones on a different way. So in other words, if you have the 2 patches and you're sowing it this way, you're seeding it this way, in the middle, he's saying you're allowed to even do those borders, but they should go this way. So it's very noticeable that they're not one big field, right? Not one big patch. Im ha'izruin shesi, then zarin arif, do it the other way. Arif, zarin shesi. So that's the way he's allowing that. Esper Ravino Rav Ashi. How do you allow that? It says avodas yerek b'yerek achar. How do you plant one vegetable with another one? In a shisha tvachim, v'roi noisam, and you see it kitavla murubas, and you look at it. In other words, that it is like a square, but only kitavlahu de shari. We only allow it when it's noticeable that they're by itself. Halav hachi is aser. So how does he allow to plant in between these squares? So Gemara says hasam la kuli beikula. Actually, this question is not on Rav Ashi. He's going back on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that you could put a circle inside, right, and fill it up with all different plants. But here it says ketavla. Here it says you can only do it as a square. Where it says hasam la kuli beikula achrina. There, Rashi says hasam libayim rubas. The reason why you need a square is la chashuve sadek amar lahate reish tur, to bring in a different heter of reish tur where it's coming right into your field, but it looks like an ox's head. So it's very noticeable. So if you allow that angle, like we said, the triangle to come into your field, that's only if the field is only done as a square, right? But less like Rabbi Yochanan had amalei reish to baruga inami isli maruga aruga. But where you're not coming completely into the field, then Rabbi Yochanan allows you to even put a circle in your square. Shkoch.